Good morning, everybody. Happy hump day. Welcome to the news agenda with me, Fleet Street Fox. And today I'm joined by my fellow Mirror columnist and associate editor, Kevin Maguire. Morning, Kevin.
Morning, Foxy.
Now, this is the People's Paper Review, so get into the comments, ask us your questions. Those of you listening later on podcast are just going to have to table a motion with the executive committee and see how far you get. So what have we got for you today? Well, the Mirror has splashed on day 2 of the revelations about Del Boy Trotter actor David Jason's secret daughter, which is a fascinating read. It did not splash on the untimely death announced overnight of TV legend and national hero Paul OGrady, because it came a little bit too late for the paper, but it's dominating the news this morning, so we're going to talk about it anyway. Now, Kevin, Paul's only 67. I think it's far, far too young to die. But there's one achievement I think is almost remarkable, I think pretty much unique to him. I don't know of anybody who's got a single bad word to say about him.
No, nor do I. He had a very big, generous heart, and he was an incredibly genuine man. And yeah, he was really, really, really funny as Lily Savage, as a talk show host, the eponymous Paul OGrady show. He was also incredibly generous with people. Countless stories of him trying to help people and turn up on their doorsteps with Christmas presents when their kids had nothing. There was one story. You remember our colleague Sue Carroll, who sadly died just over a decade ago of cancer. Big friend of Paul OGrady's, and Sue really cared how she looked, and as she was being ravaged by cancer and having chemo, and she was in hospital and looking not quite her best. He turned up and he knew she was really down. So he said, "Sue, I've seen you far worse in the past." To just laugh, and he cheered her up. But he also was a fantastic campaigner, as you say. Not just for dogs, but for people. Yes, certainly in the gay community, and he was working very closely with Peter Tatchell, the human rights campaigner, to get a police apology for a terrible raid on the Vauxhall Tavern, a pub, and a venue show.
He was there that night.
Yeah, 1987. Yeah, and he said, he was going to appear as Lily Savage. And all these cops burst in. At first, he thought they were part of the show, and they were strippers. But then they turned out not to be, and they had because it was in the idea.
He tried to rip the trousers off.
I know there was a lot of bigotry around HIV at the time, and so the coppers all had plastic, rubber gloves on. So OGrady said, "Well, you've come to help to do the washing up, have you?" Just trying to get through it with humour, but no, they were campaigning. To get an apology. I hope it's now posthumously delivered.
Yeah, no, we've had so many comments that come up on the screen there, which won't work for podcasts. But Lorraine says she's devastated. Emma Samways and others, and Margaret. Such sad news about Paul OGrady, because it wasn't just like you said. Everything he said and did seemed to strike a chord somewhere. And because if you put on paper what Paul OGrady stood for, his how passionate he was in his political beliefs, having seen, Paul says, such sad news, rest in peace, Paul. The things that he saw in Merseyside under Thatcher made him really politically quite definite and definitive about what he thought of Margaret Thatcher and so on. He was very passionate about his support for gay rights because, as you say, he was there in the Royal Vauxhall Tavern. He was a patron of the Peter Tatchell Foundation. You put some of that stuff on paper and you'd think you'd have a really, I don't want to say binary, but a really kind of a person people either loved or hated, that was very extreme somehow in their beliefs. But when you saw Paul, how he talked about it, it was just a matter of simple humanism, wasn't it? He struck a chord with people from life.
That's right. He related to people, and he was very relatable. And his head he's never turned by his considerable success. He never forgot where he came from. And some people suffered more hardship and were less fortunate than him. He was a social worker at one point in Camden and just saw some terrible things, including kids with scabies. And a couple of years ago, for the Mirror, we had a Christmas appeal to raise funds for kids who would go without. And I had to interview him and spoke to him, and I posed the question. In some ways, it was unfair. Which do you think is most important, saving dogs or saving children? Because of course he's so linked to Battersea Dogs and Cats Home and his show on TV, winning all those awards over dogs. And he said, well, but you don't really have to choose between the two, which he was right about. But he said, look, you can't be sentimental. And if it's a case of a starving dog or a starving child, of course it's the starving child. Of course it is. And then he was recounting what he saw as a social worker, and he knew the suffering there. Yeah. It was, it's all in his background. It was all in his earlier years, but he just never forgot, and it motivated him. That was it. He lived his ideals and his values. Yeah, I think that's so important.
More tributes there from our viewers. Elaine says, Paul, loved everything you did on TV and your love of animals. I think it was Shirley was the last comment as well, another tribute from her. So, I mean, he didn't sort of... The one thing about Paul as well is that when you broke through into sort of the mainstream and the big time, when he was on BBC and he was on ITV and stuff, if you want to get those gigs, you do need to sometimes, I think Gary Lineker has recently proven, need to watch what you're saying. Yeah. And be a bit more vanilla, be a bit more mainstream. And he never ever did wind his neck in, did he? He always stuck it out for people.
Yeah, he'd always smile, he'd always laugh. He had that Scouse accent. He'd dress it up as being a bit cheeky sometimes as a bit of a joke. But he made very, very important political points. They're all valid. He was taken aside, and he was taking the side of the people who need looking after and need helping. And I just thought that was absolutely terrific. And he did it every day. And in some ways, he didn't shout about it. He just did it. And he did it with his usual goodwill and humour. And that's, you and I can be pretty acerbic as journalists.
Us?
He can, but he knew how to try and win over people and disarm his opponents and try and charm them as well. But he wasn't going to give an inch. He knew right from wrong.
Yeah, exactly. Caroline there, another tribute. Thank you, everyone, for giving us your thoughts about Paul, because it wasn't just as well that this activism, as you said, Kevin, he also did an awful lot for Battersea Dogs Home. He highlighted the stories of so many animals that were in trouble there. And if you had maybe weren't interested in some of his views on other things, the fact that he was so determined to help those dogs and the cats, of course, that there as well, I think warmed everyone else's cockles of their hearts. But we can't just finish talking about Paul without mentioning the alter ego Lily Savage, who I've got to say I think is one of the most beautiful women I've probably ever seen. Mike says here, I remember him presenting The Big Breakfast as Lily Savage. It was 2 hours of live TV daily in drag, trying not to swear. That in itself must have been a huge risk to take for the bosses of Breakfast TV.
Yeah, he was a very handsome man, O'Grady. And Richard Arnold on Good Morning Britain told how he used to be a front of house at a venue, and he knew he was going to have Lily Savage on, but he'd never seen Paul OGrady as anything but Lily Savage. And this bloke just came up to him to chat, and he said, I was just struck how handsome it was, and I realised it was Paul OGrady. Yes,
Lily Savage. Well, Lily had an absolutely cracking pair of pins. I was always jealous of them. And when Lily did one of those sneers to the audience, it was beautiful. And the one thing that I really, there's obviously many things to regret about Paul passing so early. Angela says, he's a hero to all divas and animals. We sadly miss. There'll never be another Paul OGrady. The fact is that it's such a pity we didn't have the right to host Eurovision any sooner than this year, and he's not going to be around for it. Although he retired Lily a little while ago, I've always thought if we ever got Eurovision, Lily would be the perfect compare, the best possible demonstration to the rest of the world what Britain is and what it stands for.
I know. There'd be some people who would otherwise complain, but no, they're not going to have a go at Paul OGrady as Lily Savage. He would just charm and win him over. Can you imagine it also being up in Scousland, his home region?
Yeah. Oh, good Lord!
Crowning glory.
It would have been absolutely beautiful. I think even Russia would have. Did Russia get to vote in Eurovision these days? Yeah, they do, don't they? Even Russia would have voted for.
We elbowed them out.
Lily Savage.
Are they allowed to compete?
I don't know if they're coming this year, but they do take part. I think they may have perhaps been blackballed slightly. I can't remember what happened last year even, because I know obviously Ukraine won. I don't know. I can't recall. I'm not enough of a Eurovision fan because Lily Savage was never on it. That's why.
I'm sure we'll be corrected and there'll be somebody watching who will know.
So Eurovision fan, in the comments, do let us know if Russia's in or out this year or what happened last year, because we can't remember. We're too old and addled, and I didn't get enough sleep last night. But first, we do need to move on to some other stories. So thank you. If you've got any particular memories of Paul or Lily, get into the comments and let us know, and we might wrap some up at the end if there's any good ones. But we do need to move on to the next story. So very quickly, on page 2 of today's Daily Mirror, it's been revealed that the cost of extending the free school meals to every child whose family is on universal credit would be an absolutely thumping £1 billion. So, Kevin, I can think if that figure's right, I think we can all work out why the government is so reluctant to do it, because it would mean taking a few billions away from their mates. But especially as a spokesman in that copy says lower down that in 2010, there were 1 in 6 children in England on free school meals, and it's a third. But of course, that includes reception-age children in the year 1 and 2s and stuff. That's not all the poorest families. But am I right in thinking that basically this is the Tories saying it will be too expensive to give the children of universal credit families a free school meal every day for 6 months of the year, because so many families are on universal credit? But of course, the fact so many families are on universal credit is itself a massive indictment of the failures of Tory governments over the past 13 years. I mean, this is their fault it would be that expensive, isn't it?
Yeah, well, we live in a low-wage economy. Nearly half the people who are classed as in poverty have somebody in their home who works, but wages just don't pay the bills. That £1 billion cost, that's how much they're gifting the highest earners in pension tax perks to build up their pots. I mean, how was that for a symmetry? You're going to have a very few people, including, I would suspect, the Prime Minister and the Chancellor, enjoying extra tax perks for their pensions, getting public money gifted to go into their pensions. Or you could have free school meals for the most needy kids. Let me think which I would prefer. I know which Paul OGrady would prefer, and it would be the pension pot perks. But no, this report from the Institute of Fiscal Studies is kind of fascinating, because it's all about the impact of means testing and how means testing is actually very mean and unfair. Because the only people who qualify for free school meals aren't all those families on universal credit, which, as you point out, tops up low pay. It is only those on universal credit who earn a maximum £7,399 a year, which, I did the sums, is £142.29 per week. If you go to 7,400, you got a £1 pay rise, you got 7,400. Your kids don't get free school meals. So there's 1.7 million kids, families claim universal benefit because they're earning over that means tested threshold. They don't get it. And so they're losing effectively 460 quid on average per pupil. And it then means, I know you're going to get lots of figures here, but it's how means testing is wrong. Because you just come to the point and then you're off a cliff. So if you earn £7,399, you get free school meals. If you go just over, you lose them. So you could go up, you could get £1 a year pay rise, go to 7,400. You lose your free school meals. If that's 2 kids, it means you've lost the equivalent of earning up to 9,400, because of course you earn that extra money, but you wouldn't have the free school meals. It's absolutely nonsense. But if you're on universal credit, you should get free school meals. That is the bottom line. And there's 1.7 million kids not. And as a result, sometimes they go hungry, or their families face additional financial hardship. And it's a choice whether you spend the money on these kids, or you give it to the highest earners so they can build up even bigger pension pots.
So we've given £1 billion. The Tories voted for £1 billion to go to the highest earners in the country to take tax out of their pension pots. And they also have voted against giving £1 billion to universal credit families.
Yes, yes.
Removing this means testing, vicious cliff edge to saying everyone on universal credit, you get it regardless. We're not going to say there's a certain rate. And that's the choice they've made. Pension pots over kids eating dinner.
Well, how many times do you say, how much is it going to cost? Where's the money going to come from? We can't afford it. And then they make political choices. And they've made, I think, a terrible political choice. The people earning 300, 400, 500 grand a year, good luck to you if you're in the tiny minority who get that. You can put as much money in your pension as you like. You can put as much aside as you like. But it's how much do we keep on subsidising those payments by saying, if you put in a quid, we'll give you 45p back for it. So if every quid you save, it's only 55p. That's how it's working with them on the pensions. But then you got all these bloody, no, you don't like swearing.
Well, it's not us, it's Facebook.
Well, anyway, yeah.
I'm fine with swearing, but it is...
It just makes me angry about the priorities. When there are people at the bottom, those who Paul OGrady would champion are having hardship, and then they're feather bedding those at the top. That is a political choice. I think it's a wrong choice.
Well, it's an immoral choice, definitely. I don't think it's necessarily shouldn't be a political point. It's just flat wrong to not be feeding poorer children while you're putting extra pounds down the throats of people who are already quite rich and should probably have their pensions taxed a bit in order to pay for free school meals for those children who'll be paying the state pension they'll also be benefiting from when they get older, because that's not means tested, is it? Right. Anyway, we need to move on to the next story. And this is one that's sort of agitating left and right today, it's got to be said, and yesterday. So the former Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, has been banned from standing as an MP in his Islington North constituency, which he's represented for the past 40 years, right, since 1983, at the behest of current Labour leader Keir Starmer, who's made all this happen. So, Kevin, take us through all this. There was a lot of machinery within the Labour Party at work here. What exactly happened?
Yeah, right. The end result is Jeremy Corbyn will not be able to stand for Labour at the next general election in Islington North. And if he declares in the meantime that he's going to stand as an independent, he will then be expelled from the party. And the system used by Keir Starmer to implement this, and he's had Corbyn lost the whip in 2020 over, I thought he's awkward, poor, ungenerous, not very good, in truth, response to the Equalities and Human Rights Commission report into anti-Semitism in Labour. Remember, Labour was put into the equivalent of special measures, the only political party that's had that since the BNP. Separate argument whether the Tories should have been in there for Islamophobia, but nevertheless, Labour was put in on anti-Semitism because it hadn't handled complaints properly, for all sorts of reasons, different factions blaming each other. But I think Corbyn's response was very, very poor. Instead of just accepting the report, he was trying to qualify the extent of it in Labour. He's been suspended since then. But what's happened is the National Executive Committee, which is the governing body of the Labour Party, has a Starmer majority, has passed a motion. And it's very rare to do it this way. It's very, very rare, saying because, doesn't mention anti-Semitism, but it says to avoid any detrimental impact on the party's standing with the electorate and its political interests, Corbyn will not be allowed to stand. What it's really about, I think, three things. One, yes, the question around anti-Semitism. Two, I think Starmer wants to show his break from the Corbyn past by making an example of Corbyn himself. And thirdly, it's intended to silence, gag other left MPs by intimidating them and making them fear that if they speak out on policy or political issues, they too will be barred from standing. So I think it's very draconian. I think it's very authoritarian. I think Islington North should have had the decision themselves. If I lived in Islington North and I was a member of the Labour Party, which I'm not, would I adopt Jeremy Corbyn as my candidate? I might not. He's 73, might want to say, look, it's time to move on. If I lived there, would I vote for him? I might not. If he stands as an independent, could he let another party in? No, because the majority is so big. It's 26,000 of the Labour majority.
Yeah, it's the People's Republic of North London, isn't it? That is.
Yeah, well, look,
return a Tory.
But both the Tories and the Liberal Democrats could double their vote on last time. The Labour vote under Corbyn could split between Corbyn and an official Labour candidate, and what Corbyn or the official Labour candidate would still be elected. But it's all this question: is it fairness? Is it fair to do it this way, or does it just show the utter ruthlessness of Starmer in his attempt to get Labour elected, make it electable in his view? Jason Beattie, our colleague in the Mirror, has written the two sides of the argument, but he just points out that by alienating the wider left this way, he says this victory for Starmer in banning Corbyn could be tomorrow's defeat, because he will alienate some supporters.
The gamble, I suppose, that Starmer's taking is that because, as Mike says here, the anger on the left about excluding Corbyn is understandable, but anyone watching PMQ sees the Tories constantly tying Starmer to the Corbyn leadership that, of course, he served under. They see that association as toxic to Starmer. Of course, Johnson won that landslide in 2019, basically a lot of it playing on the fear of Corbyn and what Corbyn was going to do. And what it would mean for safety and security and international diplomacy and other things. And we now know, for example, with the war in Ukraine, I mean, Corbyn probably wouldn't have been, just was no way he'd have been as determined as Johnson was to arm the Ukrainians against Russia. So it would have made a huge impact. And is this not, from Starmer's point of view, the gamble that he can lose the extreme left on his party, be seen to almost detoxify it after some of the scandals of the Corbyn years, and actually not move the party to the right, but just appease that part of Britain which had a problem with Corbyn, the Daily Mail readers, that particular attack from the Tories. He can nullify that by saying, I've kicked him out.
Yeah, he is moving Labour to the right, but it will still be the centre left. It'll just be nearer the centre than the left, and he's making all those pragmatic, practical calculations. He will also argue he's acting on the principle of anti-Semitism just cannot be tolerated in any way, and he's put all that around Corbyn, because there was unquestionably a problem in Labour at the time, and some of the people who were attracted to Corbyn were anti-Semitic, and the complaints weren't dealt with fully. Sometimes nothing to do with Jeremy Corbyn and his office, as the Martin Ford QC or KC now report showed. The head office, which was opposed to Corbyn, was occasionally mishandling complaints and suspicion that was political. But there was certainly a problem, and then for a party like Labour that preaches anti-racism, equality and fairness, for a community in Britain, the Jewish community, to feel you are so much against him and anti-Semitic is appalling. And in some ways, Corbyn had a blind spot, because he would always say, well, I've spent my entire life campaigning against racism, so he couldn't understand why some of the things he said and did were alienating the community that will say, look, that is anti-Semitic.
Yeah, and then there's the argument that he spent his entire life doing these things. Alex Cohn says Corbyn's like Orban in Hungary, maybe. But the idea that he spent his entire life fighting for something and hasn't got it does make you wonder whether really he's that effective as an MP.
Well, I thought he was an ineffective leader. I thought he was a poor leader in many ways. Although it's got to be said, Labour's had a deeper problem than Jeremy Corbyn, because even in the drubbing of 2019, Labour's share of the vote in that general election was higher than Ed Miliband got in 2015 and Gordon Brown in 2010. In some ways, Starmer now getting Labour in the lead with double-digit poll leads is a phenomenal turnaround, unquestionably. lots of reasons for that, and assisted in some ways by Boris Johnson, who wooed the country in 2019 and then became an utter liability for the Tories after Partygate, then Liz Truss.
Well,
but nevertheless,
Boris Johnson's quite good at wooing. He's not so good at actually sticking around after the wooing has been completed.
But Starmer and his supporters can, I think, legitimately argue they've gone from Labour winning its fewest number of seats since 1935 to rattling the gates of Downing Street and knocking on the door of number 10 at the next election. That's a remarkable transformation.
Yeah, and as Lazy pointed out there, you've got similar divisions in the Conservative Party. They've had a remarkable transformation in terms of, having a landslide only, just over 3 years ago, and completely spaffing the whole thing up the wall in a very short space of time. I don't think Facebook will notice that was a swear, so let's not mention it.
Well, there's a Boris Johnson quote in another context.
Exactly. One quick thing before we move on to good news. If Jeremy Corbyn might stand as an independent, I suppose maybe he can't be selected by a rebel Labour Party constituency, Labour Party anywhere else. That's not going to be on the books. But if he were to stand against the approved Labour candidate in Islington North, there was a general election, there would be a huge amount of national attention on it. There would be a huge number of momentum activists who generally there's not enough. There's a lot of them on Twitter, but there isn't enough of them in any one constituency to actually swing a cat. Whereas if they all just, descend on Islington North and try to get their man back in, they would plough all what little resources they have now into that. Labour would throw a lot of its perhaps effort into trying to get their person in, as opposed to Jeremy. It would become quite a battleground, wouldn't it? And become quite obvious. Is there any chance that Corbyn could actually take that, could win, or is he's just going to split the vote and he's going to lose?
No, I think there's a reasonable good chance of your Jeremy Corbyn of winning. Islington North is the most compact, dense constituency in the UK. He's been there for 40 years. He will have helped many of the people living in it. He will know them. He's got huge name recognition. And as you say, there will be loads of every trot in the country will go to campaign for him. There'll be lots of door knocking, leafleting, street corner rallies. Labour, to counter that, would need a candidate. I would, just chatting to people in Labour, they think they need a vibrant young local woman of colour who can present as the future, not the past. If they don't smile at this, Foxy. But if she was called Aardvark or Boardwalk, she'd appear ahead of him. Corbyn on the ballot paper when people are looking for the name and the logo, and it would be whether this Islington North circus somehow pulls Labour down and the Tories can say this is the real face of Labour, or Starmer can say, look at my Labour Party and look at that one. That's how I've changed. It's what is it a symbol of? But
a fresh face against the old guard is probably quite an appealing sell for a lot of people.
Yeah.
Never mind, just for the election generally. If Starmer can't say New Labour, can he? But he needs to have some kind of hopey, changey Barack Obama type rhetoric to say, you've had 13 years of the Tories, whether it's going to be then 15 years. Let's move on. Let's do something different. Let's change. And that might be very indicative of that. But we'll have to wait and see, won't we? Thank you for explaining that to us, Kevin. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. Now, we do have some good news in the world. Keep asking your questions, everybody, by the way. What do you think about, have you got any memories of Paul OGrady or anything that particularly stands out? What do you think about removing the means testing for free school meals? Is that necessary, or do you think it's an important investment in our economy somehow to make rich people richer in their pension pots? Bit of a leading question for you. And what do you think about Corbyn's deselection? Is that a necessary part of detoxifying the Labour Party in time for the next election, or is that anti-democratic and just not what the Labour Party should be for? Let us know. We'll try and have a wrap up at the end. But before then, we've found some good news. There is some in the world, and here it is. Now, this is a lovely story about Amelia, who's aged 11 on the right there of that picture, and her neighbour Maureen, who's 74, as they're giving her a hug. Now, Maureen wouldn't be alive if it wasn't for Amelia. She'd taken a fall at home in Norwich on Christmas Eve and had no family check-up on her. She was stuck on the floor for a few days. She developed pneumonia. She was hallucinating. The doctors say she was 24 hours away from death. But then Amelia, who was a neighbour, noticed the curtains were closed and the lights were still on during the day, took a peek through the window and saw Maureen's slippers stuck up in the air on the floor because she was obviously was lying down on the floor and realised something's wrong. She and her dad broke in. They called an ambulance. Maureen took a few weeks in hospital to recover, and now she is back at home, full of the joys of spring, literally, and says that she owes it all to Amelia, which is absolutely lovely story. Kevin, is this proof, I suppose, that all right, the state might not be looking out for us in the way that it should, but there's still plenty of decent people in the world who are?
Oh, I think most people. Yeah, I think most people are decent and keep an eye out for their neighbours. And I love this story. Like it doesn't mean everyone's got a license to go and peek in other people's windows. I think you have to have a reason to do that.
She didn't have a reason to look through the window. She noticed the lights were on during the day.
Yeah. But I love the Slippers of the Yard, which of course is a play on Slipper of the Yard, who was the detective. It was Ronnie Biggs, wasn't it?
Yeah.
One of those people.
Black Slipper, who tracked Ronnie Biggs down to Rio.
Brazil. Yeah, the boy
finally got his man.
So I really love the Slippers of the Yard headline, although I sometimes wonder that if the social reference points of people like you, me, and whoever wrote it are a bit old for younger people. But no, it is just heartwarming, and young people get a lot of flack, too much flack, sometimes in the media, sometimes probably in the mirror as well. And there's always these moral panics about them using nitrous oxide, laughing gas, which now, the government wants to ban, announce Michael Gove, of course, who had to pull out the Tory leadership contest because of his own use of cocaine. But nevertheless, most young kids, most young people, most people are decent, friendly, and look out for each other. I think that's what we should remember.
Yes, I think that's probably pretty much what Paul OGrady would tell us as well if he were here. Now, I think we've got a few comments to wrap on before we go. Keith says, what chance do the Lib Dems stand of winning the next election? I think last time I checked, Keith, there were 11 Liberal Democrat MPs in the House of Commons. Chances of them winning the next election are approximately 0, but they've got a very good chance of doing the Tories a lot of injury in the old blue wall in the south, haven't they, Kev?
Yeah, I think the Lib Dems have got a much chance winning the general election as I have scoring a hat trick for England in a World Cup final, which sadly is 0, as you say. But now they've been doing rather well recently in those blue wall seats, winning a series of by-elections. And look, I don't think Labour will get a big majority. If Labour win the general election, it'll be a small majority. It might even just be the biggest party in a hung parliament, which would then give the Lib Dems some power. But what we don't know, and what could hurt the Lib Dems, is Labour's revival nationally could mean some people in those blue wall seats who are Labour supporters but would need to vote tactically for the Lib Dems for them to oust Conservatives. Will they stick with Labour just because Labour's buoyant and they like what they see? That's what we don't know.
Yeah, and there's also, of course, the boundary changes that are coming in. I live in Maidstone and the Weald, which is part urban and part really rural, like that there. And so it's always been a safe blue seat, but it's been split now into an urban ward and a more rural constituency. And so the chances, how you're going to vote, depending on where you live, might actually start changing if you start thinking about it, because the votes for Labour voters in Maidstone are going to have far more impact, maybe returning a Labour MP, than it would do out in the Weald with all the people out here live in the sticks. So that's going to make a big change in the next election as well, isn't it? The safe seats are all going to get tickled a bit.
No, that's right. If you've been living in a certain area, you might have liked the local MP, you might have disliked the local MP. That could have impacted how you vote. Now, there'll be some change on that, but there's a huge churn at general elections, which is actually always bigger than the changes between the parties, because people in 2019, there would have been people who used to vote for Conservatives who would have gone to Labour under Corbyn, despite the fact they got hammered. Or something like it's something like a quarter of the country changes how it votes between general elections.
Interesting. And also, of course, there's going to be photo ID needed this time. So in the local elections that are coming up in May, you will need photo ID, as we said the other day. And we're going to keep saying on this show, make sure if you go to the ballot station, you have a passport or your driving license with you. Or if you don't have one of those things, there are various ways you can find online to get the right kind of ID that will enable you to vote. Don't lose your vote. People who are poorer are less likely to have those kinds of photo ID, and it is being done in order to keep poorer people out of the ballot, the polling station. So make sure you try and get some form of ID to take down there. Mike says Russia are not competing in the Eurovision this year. Thank you, Mike, for helping us. The Eurovision board, whoever that is, banned them in 2022. Yeah, of course they did. And P.S. you've got tickets. Well done, Mike. You're one of the only people in the country who's managed to get tickets to go to Liverpool for Eurovision. I hope you have a nice time. It's a great pity that Lily won't be there with you. But thank you for answering the question. I'm sure someone went off and Googled it. I knew someone would. Thank you, Kevin, for explaining all that to us. Thank you, everyone, for taking part. And I think PMQs will be back on this channel later on at 12 o'clock. So tune in to see. Is it? I think Rishi and Keir were going to Betty Boothroyd's funeral today. It was being so it's the deputies today, isn't it?
Yeah, you got Dominic Raab, who's accused of bullying, and Angela Rayner for Labour, who'll bully Dominic Raab.
I'd pay good money to see Dominic Raab being bullied. Right, everyone, thank you for taking part. Come back for PMQs later on, and we'll see you again on Monday for another edition of the News Agenda. Till then, tatty bye.